My own parents stood at the altar of our megachurch, looked directly into the cameras streaming to thousands, and called my marriage a sin. They shamed me from the pulpit, telling the congregation that marrying a widower with a child would ruin my life. I sat in the back pew, tears blurring my vision as my father practically cast me out of the family. They refused to attend my wedding, convinced it would be a shameful, empty affair. But they didn't count on a 6-year-old girl named Olivia. When the church doors opened on my wedding day, my stepdaughter walked down the aisle holding a handmade sign. The entire room went completely silent before people broke down sobbing. A guest captured it on video, and 48 hours later, 11 million people had seen what the sign said. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Clara, and at 29 years old, I finally learned what it truly means to choose your own family. For most of my life, my identity was entirely wrapped up in my parents' expectations. They are influential leaders at a massive megachurch, where appearances are everything and compliance is mistaken for devotion. But everything changed the day I met David. David is 35, a brilliant, kind-hearted man who carried a quiet sorrow in his eyes. 3 years before we met, his wife passed away after a long illness, leaving him to raise their daughter, Olivia, all on his own. When David and I fell in love, I didn't just see a partner. I saw a beautiful, resilient little 6-year-old girl who deserved the world. Olivia and I formed an instant, inseparable bond. But when I proudly introduced David to my parents, expecting them to share my joy, the reaction was freezing cold. Because David was a widower with a child, my parents viewed him not as a man who had survived tragedy, but as someone with baggage that would ruin my life. They firmly believed a first marriage should only be between two people with flawless, uncomplicated pasts. My father told me flatly that marrying him would drag our family name through the mud and disrupt the traditional, perfect image they preached every single week. They demanded I break it off, forcing me to choose between their conditional approval and the deep, authentic love I had found. The tension erupted into a public execution of my character on a Sunday morning I will never forget. A few days after my confrontation with my parents, my mother called, her voice uncharacteristically soft as she invited me to the morning service. She claimed they wanted to extend an olive branch and find a path toward reconciliation before the wedding. Naively, I believed her, wanting so desperately to have my family stand by my side. I arrived right before the opening hymn and slipped into a pew near the back, looking for any sign of warmth from the stage. Instead, I walked straight into a trap. When my father stepped up to the pulpit, his expression wasn't one of grace, but of righteous anger. The title of his sermon flashed across the massive digital screens, "The Dangers of Unequally Yoked Desires." For the next 40 minutes, his booming voice echoed through the sanctuary as he delivered a fiery lecture on absolute obedience, traditional family structures, and the spiritual ruin that follows when children defy their elders. Then, the betrayal cut deeper. He looked directly toward the back pew, pointing out my situation as a tragic example of a young woman being led astray by worldly pity, marrying into a ready-made family instead of waiting for a pure, uncomplicated match. The entire congregation turned to stare, their eyes heavy with judgment. People I had known since childhood, family friends who had watched me grow up, suddenly looked away in collective embarrassment or shook their heads in disapproval. I sat frozen as tears blurred my vision, realizing my parents had weaponized their spiritual authority just to publicly humiliate me. Right then, I stood up and walked out of the church forever, firmly resolved to build my future on real love, completely free from their toxic demands. The morning of my wedding arrived, carrying a bittersweet weight that settled heavily in my chest. As I sat in front of the vanity mirror adjusting my veil, the silence from my family was deafening. There were no frantic text messages from my mother, no emotional tears from my father, and no bustling relatives filling the bridal suite. True to their word, my parents had completely boycotted the ceremony, and they had actively convinced most of our extended family to stay away as well. When I arrived at the small, sunlit chapel, the stark reality hit me. The left side of the sanctuary, The bride's side sat almost entirely empty, a painful visual reminder of the community that had abandoned me for choosing love. But down the hall, in the groom's room, a completely different plan was quietly unfolding. My 6-year-old stepdaughter, Olivia, was bursting with an excitement she could barely contain. Dressed in her miniature white lace dress, she tightly clutched a large piece of poster board she had spent the entire previous evening working on in secret. When David and the wedding coordinator tried to glance at it, Olivia quickly hid it behind her back, shaking her head with fierce determination. She insisted that it was a special surprise made strictly for me, and she absolutely refused to let anyone catch a glimpse of it until the heavy chapel doors opened for her walk. Her innocent joy became the shield that protected us from the lingering bitterness outside. The heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel swung open, and the soft strains of the acoustic guitar filled the room. The guests turned in their seats, expecting a traditional flower girl tossing petals. Instead, little Olivia stepped out onto the runner all by herself, her small white shoes taking slow, deliberate steps down the long aisle. The room went completely, utterly silent as everyone caught sight of what she was holding. She wasn't carrying a basket. Instead, she proudly held the large poster board sign high up against her chest, her tiny fingers gripping the edges tightly so every single person in the pews could read it clearly. Written in bright, slightly uneven child's handwriting with colorful marker pens, the message struck the entire room like a physical wave of emotion. The sign read, "She didn't give me life, but life gave me her. Today, I finally get a mommy again." A collective gasp rippled through the pews, quickly followed by the sound of muffled sobs. The pure, unvarnished innocence of her words completely shattered the lingering tension in the chapel. I stood at the back, completely overwhelmed as tears of absolute joy spilled over my cheeks, blurring my vision. Up at the altar, David watched his beautiful daughter walking toward him, his shoulders shaking as he broke down weeping, unable to contain his emotion. In that single, breathtaking moment, Olivia's simple sign completely erased the cruelty of my parents' rejection, filling the empty spaces of the church with a powerful, undeniable love that no pulpit could ever tear down. Among the guests weeping in the pews was Sarah, a close family friend who had quietly pulled out her smartphone the moment Olivia stepped into the aisle. She captured the entire walk on video, tracking Olivia's determined steps, the colorful handmade sign, and the raw breakdown of emotion from David and me at the altar. Later that evening, during our modest reception, Sarah showed us the clip and asked if she could share it online to celebrate our beautiful new beginning. We readily agreed, thinking it would simply be a sweet keepsake for few friends and distant relatives who couldn't attend. We had absolutely no idea that the world was starving for that exact kind of pure, redemptive love. Sarah uploaded the short video to social media late that night. Within just 24 hours, the algorithms picked it up, and the clip began spreading across platforms like wildfire. By the 48-hour mark, our quiet ceremony had transformed into a global internet sensation, climbing past a staggering 11 million views. Tens of thousands of comments poured in from all over the globe, with strangers celebrating the beauty of blended families and praising Olivia's resilience. Without saying a single word to defend ourselves, the overwhelming love from millions of complete strangers completely vindicated our choices, turning our private family victory into a beautiful testament of healing that resonated far beyond our small town. The explosive global success of the viral video quickly triggered a massive, unintended fallout back at my parents' megachurch. The 11 million views didn't stay online. The video spread rapidly through their own congregation, causing churchgoers to openly question the harsh, judgmental stance my father had taken from the pulpit. Faced with a growing public relations crisis that threatened their influential reputation and ministry, my parents suddenly changed their tune. Just 1 week after the wedding, I heard a knock at our front door. I opened it to find my mother and father standing on the porch, their expressions tight, holding a large gift basket that felt entirely transactional. They stepped inside and immediately launched into a polished, superficial apology, claiming they had merely been worried about my future financial security and had allowed their protective instincts to cloud their judgment. But as my father kept glancing at his phone, checking the local news updates, the truth became painfully obvious. They hadn't come because their hearts had softened. They had come because their carefully constructed world was crumbling under public scrutiny, and they desperately needed a public reconciliation photo to save face. Looking at them, the lingering fear I once carried completely evaporated. I calmly but firmly stood my ground, refusing to let them use my new family as a prop for their damage control. I told them that while I forgave them, they no longer had the right to dictate my choices or access my life. I ushered them out the door, closing it on their toxic demands for good, knowing that David and Olivia were my true family now. Fast forward a few months later, and our lives have transformed into something more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. Free from the constant weight of my parents' conditional expectations, David, Olivia, and I have built a peaceful, thriving home filled with laughter and unconditional support. I watch Olivia playing in the yard, her bright smile a daily reminder that family isn't defined strictly by bloodlines, but by the conscious choice to love, protect, and show up for one another every single day. The painful sting of the pulpit humiliation has completely faded, replaced by the deep, fulfilling security of the life we are creating together. Looking back, I realized that my parents' rejection was actually the catalyst that forced me to discover my own strength and standard of truth. True parenthood isn't about maintaining a perfect public image. It's about the raw, beautiful willingness to heal together. Now, I'm curious about all of you who have followed our journey until the end. What would you have done if you were standing in my shoes? Have you ever had to choose love over family expectations? Let me know in the comments below. Meanwhile, I am leaving 2 other incredible stories on the final screen that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you so much for watching.